maps. And I want to read this quote. This responds, by the way, to a question that was asked yesterday about why do we call this a map? Why should we call it a map? And so here's Borges. In that empire, the craft of cartography attained such perfection that the map of a single province covered the space of an entire city, and the map of that empire itself an entire province. In the course of time, these extensive maps were found somehow wanting, and so the College of Cartographers evolved a map of the empire that was of the same scale as the empire, and that coincided with it point for point. Less attentive to the study of cartography, succeeding generations came to judge a map of such magnitude cumbersome, and not without irreverence, they abandoned it to the rigors of sun and rain. In the western deserts, tattered fragments of the map are still to be found, sheltering an occasional beast or beggar. In the whole nation, no other relic is left of the discipline of geography. And if you read Borges, you are aware he is making fun of technology and cartography. And I wonder what we're doing here with this map. I don't think we're making fun of it, but I think we're very far from understanding it. That fantastic map of Borges describes what he describes as a far cry from what we mean by a map. We mean by a map a graphic representation that helps us understand things spatially, a reduced substitute for what we think is the real world. We draw our maps to scale. We employ a grid, and usually a flat surface. We use abstract symbols, yellow and red and black. Red ribbons become our roads. Black dots of various sizes become our cities. Bigger black dots are bigger cities. Smaller black dots can be villages. Heavy lines become our borders. Sometimes different colors depict different territories. Well, after a decade of work on a multi-volume text on maps, the famous historian of cartography, David Woodward, was forced to change his definition of what a map is. He was informed by the diversity of non-Western representational devices contributed by experts from around the globe, and Woodward goes to great length, several pages, to frame a new definition, which he then takes several more pages to criticize. The essence of his revised definition is that a map can be any method or means that helps enhance a people's spatial understanding, be it organizing images in some material medium, or even via the oral mode, such as songs or poems or gestures. And even I would disagree with that definition because it says nothing about the inclusion of time. And the Mapa de Cuauhtinchan is this marvelous blending of time and space. And I think that Keiki Oneda has done a marvelous job in talking about the spatial elements and the cartography, and I'm glad I'm following her because I can talk now maybe about the calendrical glyphs and the number glyphs. As I look at the dazzling imagery, the colorful imagery depicted on the Mapa de Cuauhtinchan II and exposed in this wonderful book, strange people, rites, confrontations, voyages, sacred bundles, weird plants, personified mountains, different climates, rain falling, volcanoes erupting, the sun and the stars shining, all of it held together by the sinuous footsteps that seem to move erratically through space, unless you look closely. They seem to move erratically through space. And the various time glyphs, temporal glyphs, that seem to indicate some form of time-factored thought. Viewing all that, I cannot imagine what I am missing as I dare attempt to apprehend someone else's reality. I think it's all too easy to use our perception of the real and force it on the ancient Cuauhtinchlakas. Well, my primary attraction to the Mapa resides in the many dates written in it and the events that might be represented by those dates, conceived metaphorically or otherwise. And as we'll see in this talk, there are three basic characteristics about the way I think pan-Mesoamerican cultures deal with time, pan-Mesoamerican cultures deal with time that appear to serve as defining parameters in the Mapa. First, there are a multitude of ways that the artist, the sculptor, or the scribe seeks to command the eye of the reader to move in order to discover time's journey. And I think the Mesoamerican codices offer excellent variations on these methods. And here is the Selden roll, not so far south from here, where time goes this way, back and forth in a kind of a boustrophodon zigzag notation. And there are many other examples of how time moves. A second principle that I think permeates pan-Mesoamerican thinking about the expression of time is that there is a tendency to conflate what I call the testimony of people, what we call human history, with the testimony of things, what we call natural history, which we in our Western culture see as separate. Who will speak of the history of the Sierra Nevada de Toluca in connection with the history of the people who live there? We don't think to do that. But this is done. Even you see here in a page from the Codex Telleriano-Remensis, where you have an object falling from the sky, and here an event taking place on the top of a mountain, perhaps a battle or warfare or something going on. And we might say, well, that's only to indicate the year. Only the year is indicated here at the top. But it's interesting that these images of natural history and human history are brought together. This is something we don't find in our culture. And a third principle about time, and I think perhaps the most important in the present context, is that real time, in the Western sense, and mythic time, what we call mythic time, appear often side by side. Let me show you an example from the Maya world. This is from the Tablet of the Cross at Palenque, where you have the accession of the ruler to office. I'm not showing you the text because they're very large, but there are hieroglyphic texts reflecting the mythic ancestry of this ruler, alongside historic time reflecting his recent acquisition of the throne, those whom he conquered, the history of his family, his mother, his father, his grandparents. But then there is a gap of 1,000 years, and you go back to the text on the left side where you deal with mythic history. So this is a little bit like the left side of the Mapa, and over here a little bit like the right side. And there are many, many panels and stelae and monuments in the Maya world where we have a lot of writing, a lot of detailed writing, where you have these two histories, mythic and contemporary history, side by side. And so then now to this wonderful map, and we'll explore time in it. And I think I have to give a couple of lessons here about calendar. I will assume a limited knowledge of the calendars on your part, but I will beg the indulgence of those of you who are well aware with what year bearers and so on are. Because if we don't know these concepts, then we really can't understand time. I'm fond of telling my students when I teach them the writing systems and the calendars of the Maya, which are very complex, and they say, oh, this is so difficult, so difficult. And I have to tell them, if the Maya were doing it, and you want to understand the Maya, then you have to understand the calendar. So now I lecture you. You have to understand the calendar. And I know many of you do. But here is this Mapa where we have, of course, as we now know, on the left side, the mythic time, which proceeds in a counterclockwise sense, this mythic journey, in a counterclockwise sense, as it does on the right side, where we deal with the migration history, the circumambulation of the ecosphere of Cuauhtinchan, as I would like to call it. That is also a counterclockwise journey, which is so typical of what you find in the inscriptions and in the codices. Now, so here we have on the left side a certain kind of set of dates, and I think here you'll see numbers that you may be able to recognize. Here you have grass, and you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 12 grass, and then you have over here 13 reed, so you can count these dots. We know, of course, this is the count of the tonal powali, the 260-day cycle, well known throughout Mesoamerica, where we have 20 named days, 20 days named. There are only 2 here, but there's a sequence, and 13 numbers or coefficients that go in front of them. And this is very like our dates: March 8, Friday, March 9, Saturday, March 10, Sunday, and we rotate through 7 days of the week, 7 days. They rotate through 20 days. We rotate 1, 2, 3 through 31 days, or 30, or 28, or 29, because our calendar is so messed up. They rotate through 13. So this is just exactly like what we do, but with different numbers. Easy to recognize. Now, it's interesting that these dates, consecutive dates, because if you look on the table of the Aztec day names, we can find these names, and here's grass, and there's reed, and so you have grass and reed, and then you have jaguar, and then you have eagle, and there are all the days named there, 20 of them. And it's interesting that on the left side, and I think this has already been stated, but it's good now since I give my talk late in these sessions to reiterate important, very important points, that all 20-day names are mentioned in order on the left side of the map, which is to say that every conceivable time is covered in this myth. Of course, that sojourn on the left side didn't happen in 20 days any more than God created the world in Genesis in 7. But to say that God created the world in 7 is to say he used all the time. He used every day. He used everything that there was. And so symbolically, at least, we can say this journey on the left side, when our 2 heroes, if you will, come from Cholula and go to the cave of Chicomostoc and go around and come back to Cholula seeking advice and seeking help, that sojourn covered all time, covered all mythic time. And I wanted to suggest here that the footsteps that we always talk about really do conceive time, for in the book of Chilambalam of Tizimin, which is a Maya document, and I very much believe in pan-Mesoamericanism. I don't think enough of us who study central Mexico read the Maya stuff, and I think my Mayan friends are a little bit elite, because they say, well, they didn't have writing over there in central Mexico. I think we have to start being more like the scribes and the astronomers and the shamans who made these codices. There's no question they were talking to each other. We find in the Madrid Codex the same kind of formulation of time and calendar and astronomy in great detail that we find in the Borgia Codex. And I think we're only really beginning to talk to each other. And again, the archive has played a strong role in this. But anyway, my point is that here you saw yesterday in Professor Carrasco's talk, the page 1 of the Codex Fedjervari Meyer. You will remember that as the quadripartite diagram with time, the 260-day count, arranged in 13 groups of 20, goes all the way around the diagram. Time envelops space. And here is a suggestion, and I think it comes from the book of Chilambalam of Tizimin. This is a Maya document. Actually, this is a page from the Madrid Codex. And look at the feet here, the feet of time. And it says in the Tizimin, it says that when the gods created time, they made the measure of time with the feet. They said, let us measure out time, and let one measure of time be 40 paces. In other words, 2 body counts, 20 and 20. And so already they're telling us that time is space. The footprints really are time. And so here we have this suggested, and I wanted to show this because David showed that Fedjervari. Here are the feet of time, literally walking the road of time. So let's look then on the right side where we have different kinds, a different set of dates, a totally different kind of set of dates. And here you see some of them. Here's 5 rabbit. Let me back up. Yeah, 5 rabbit, 5 and rabbit. And there you can see 6 reed and 10 reed. These are not days of the 260-day count as they are. They are the names of the days of New Year. Now, imagine that, let me give you an example from our calendar. The first day of this year, 2013, January 1, was Tuesday. So we could say that this is the Tuesday year. We could say that the year bearer, the day that carries the year, that bears the burden of the year, is Tuesday. Next year, the year bearer will be Wednesday. Why is that? Well, that's because there are 7 weeks, 7-day weeks, 52 of them in a year. And there's one extra because if you divide, I'm sorry, I have to get mathematical now with you, but if you divide 365 by 7, you have a remainder of 1. So you know this from your birthday. Whatever your birthday is this year, next year is 1 day later. So with New Year, the year bearer for 2014 will be Wednesday. The year bearer for 2015 will be Thursday. The year bearer for 2016, however, will not be Friday because 2016 is a leap year. We have really messed up time in a way that in Mesoamerica they didn't. They were pristine in their time considerations. So we advanced the year bearer by 1. Good analogy. What about these dates on the right side? They're all dates consisting of the names rabbit, house, rabbit, reed, flint. House, rabbit, reed, and flint. And those are the only days of the year that are mentioned. And that's because they are the first days of consecutive years. Why is that? Well, here's house, happens to be 3rd on the list here. And here's rabbit, it's the 8th on the list. And here's reed, it's the 13th on the list. And here's flower, it's the 18th, flint is the 18th on the list. I should have said house, rabbit, reed, flint. Make sure about that. House, rabbit, reed, flint. Number 3, number 8, number 13, number 18. In other words, they're 5 apart. So if this year, now we think in Mesoamerican terms, if this year is a rabbit year, or let's say it's the year 3 house, let's say that 3 house is the name of the day of New Year's in the tonal Powali, what will next year be? Well, since 365 is 18 times 20 with 5 left over, then you would have to count forward 5 days, not 1 day as in our calendar, to get to the name of New Year's Day. And so therefore, if you start with a house, you will be followed by a rabbit, and then the rabbit will be followed by reed, and then by flint, and then by house, if you run down the table. That's because of the division of 365 by 20 gives you 5 left over, and so you have to count forward. What about the number that goes in front of the day? Don't get worried, my mathematics lesson is nearly finished. The number that goes in front of the day, there are 13 of those numbers. If you take 13 and divide it into 365, you have 28 times 13, that's 364, 1 left over. So you have to count forward by 1. So if this year is a 3-house year, if the year begins on day 3 house, and 3 house in the tonal Powali bears the year, then next year will be born by 4 rabbit, 1 forward from 3, 5 forward from house. The year after will be 5 reed, 6 flint, back to house, 7 house, and you can figure the next one and the next one. And the beauty of keeping Mesoamerican time is it never changes, for there is no leap year, and there never was a leap year. This business about there being leap years in the Aztec calendar is a product of the Hispanic intervention. There is no leap year, and I will defend go outside and we will fight about that argument. So many people think it's a leap year, and I think it's a good example of the Western fabrication. Okay, so the end of the lesson, I wanted to make sure you understand that there are 2 kinds of dates. On the left side, in the mythic time, the names of all of the days, the 20 days recounted in order. And on the right side, very specific time, real time, in years. And we can say, well, it's too bad they didn't have a long count. It's too bad they didn't have a count of years the way we do, 1952, 1953. We can only go by these year bearers. And those year bearers repeat only after 52 years, which is why they had the new fire. Every 52 years, 4 house comes back again. So when we see a date 4 house, we don't know what year it is, but we do know it could be one of 52 years, and then one that's 52 years later, or 52 years earlier, or 2 times 52 years earlier, or 4 times 52 years later, and this creates some problems in the interpretation of the real-time history. So here we are at the center, and I love to show this because this is the place where the 2 kinds of dates meet. Here is the 7 flower date, which belongs on the left side. That's the mythic side. But over here are dates from the right side. Here, the 5 years of residency in Cholula, beginning off the edge. You can't see it because it's destroyed. But there is a one flint date off the edge. And then you have 2 house, and there you see it, 2 house, 3 rabbit, 4 reed. These are the year bearer dates. Evidently the time of residence in that place, in Cholula. So let me say something about how we try to use these year bearers to comprehend real-time history. And here I refer to Emily Umberger's study of dates that appear on Aztec sculpture. She finds 2 different kinds of year bearer dates that appear on Aztec sculpture. And they refer to specific events that took place in the 15th and 16th century. And there are also symbolic dates that allude to important events in several time frames and have different levels of meaning. These are her so-called like-in-kind events. Like-in-kind events. The idea is to link events in the mythic past to those in the historic present by way of particular ceremonial days and calendrical names of gods, what she calls like-in-kind events. And I know of no analogy in the Western calendar to this. I can suggest one from United States history. I wish I knew Mexican history better to be able to do this, but we know very well that the decade of the 1960s saw the assassination of our President Kennedy, of Robert Kennedy, of Martin Luther King. It was a terrible decade, and when anybody mentions the 60s in the States, one immediately thinks of these terrible assassinations. Now, it happens that our President Abraham Lincoln was assassinated in the 1860s. In the 1860s. So you could say, and this is not the perfect analogy, but one could say that the 60s connote the times of assassination, the tragedy of assassination that happened in the 60s. And I think it's something like this that we're dealing with in the Mesoamerican and particularly in the history of central Mexico. So, for example, the year 1 Flint becomes not only the year 1324, in which the Aztecs left mythical Aztlan, but also 1428, which is 2 times 52 years later, when they won their independence from the Tepanecs. And I think we see the dates like these in the Mapa. Moreover, 1 Flint was also the calendrical name and ritual day associated with Huitzilopochtli, who was their tutelary god. And Emily Umberger has analyzed these special dates as a way of revealing the repetitive nature of Aztecs, the Aztec expression of history, what H.B. Nicholson termed pattern history. This is the kind of history we're dealing with. Well, her study is concerned with the assassination of particular kinds of events to specific year-bearer dates in the 52-year cycle. And I drew quite heavily on her analysis of history in doing my work here. In fact, Edward Kalneck and I were inspired by her work to engage in a project in which we looked at dates of eclipses recorded in Mexica historical manuscripts. And I don't have time to go into that, but it has been published. Now, if the Toltecs stayed in Cholula from 1 Flint through 6 House, these dates here, if that was the length of residency there, might it be reasonable to ask in which 1 Flint did they arrive and in which 6 House did they depart? And how do these dates connect with those on the right side of the map? And I won't have nearly enough time to explore that in detail, but you can read my chapter. I'll give you one example of one of these dates and how we try to deal with it in the study of like-in-kind events. Here's the first step in exploring the chronology of dates on the right side of the map and their structure, and their like-in-kind structure. I tried to focus on laying out a timeline. I've been able to read 26 year-bearer dates, 3 of which are repeated with some certainty. And I have to thank here Maria Straulino for the magnificent restoration, but she damaged my analysis because I thought I had some of these dates figured out before Marina restored the map, and then when she did, I had to change my hypothesis. But this is closer to the truth. You brought us closer to the truth than the old version of the map, and so that's a wonderful progress that we made thanks to you. And I have to say also to Yoneda's scheme, which I used in formulating these different plates and parts that gave structure to the map. These year-bearer dates, let's see, did I list them? Yeah, there they are. I mean, it's not important, but you can see they're all Rabbit House, Reed Flint. They have to be year-bearer dates. They are nothing like the dates on the left side. And there they are.